The rain at a funeral always feels like a cliché until you are the one standing in it. It was a cold, driving rain that seemed to seep through the wool of my black coat, settling into my bones with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I was 71 years old. My name is Eleanor, and I was standing over the open ground that was about to swallow Robert, the man I had shared a bed, a bank account, and a life with for 50 years. The priest was speaking about Robert's generosity. He was talking about Robert's steadfast nature, his role as a pillar of the community, and his unwavering loyalty. I nodded along, my chin tucked into my scarf, playing the part I had perfected over 5 decades. The grieving widow, the dignified matriarch. I held a tissue to my nose, not because I was weeping uncontrollably, but because the cold was making my eyes water. The truth was, I felt a strange numbness, a vast white silence inside me where the hysteria should have been. I looked around the circle of umbrellas. There were so many people. Robert had been a man of influence, a man who commanded rooms and made decisions that other people simply lived with. I saw our friends, the neighbors, the business associates. And standing right beside me, close enough that his arm brushed mine, was Arthur. Arthur was Robert's younger brother. He was 68, a sharper, colder version of the man I had married. Where Robert had been boisterous and demanding, Arthur was quiet and calculating. He had always made me uneasy, though I never said it aloud. A good wife doesn't criticize her husband's family. That was one of the rules I lived by. As the priest said the final Amen, the crowd murmured it back, a low rumble of agreement. People began to shift, preparing to throw their flowers onto the casket. I stepped forward, my legs feeling heavy, like I was wading through deep water. I dropped a single white rose onto the wood. It made a soft thud that seemed deafening to me. I whispered, "Rest now, Robert." It was a wish for him, but perhaps in the back of my mind, it was a wish for myself too. A hope that the noise and the demands were finally over. I stepped back, intending to turn toward the waiting car, toward the warmth of the heater and the silence of the drive home. That was when Arthur leaned in. He didn't touch me. He just leaned his head down, bringing his mouth close to my ear under the shelter of my umbrella. I expected a platitude. "He's at peace now, Eleanor, or we're here for you." Instead, his voice was dry, devoid of any moisture or warmth. "You shouldn't be here tomorrow, Eleanor." I froze. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. I turned to look at him, thinking I had misheard, thinking my hearing aids were malfunctioning in the damp air. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice trembling. Arthur didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead at his brother's grave, his profile sharp and unyielding. "The house," he said, his voice low enough that no one else could hear, but clear as a bell to me. "Don't go back there tomorrow. It's best if you start packing tonight. I'll come by in the morning with the lawyers." He pulled back then, adjusting his cuffs, and walked away toward the line of black cars, leaving me standing there with my mouth slightly open, the rain drumming against the silk of my umbrella. I stood there for a long time. The other mourners passed me, patting my shoulder, squeezing my arm, murmuring condolences that sounded like static. "So sorry for your loss. He was a good man. Call us if you need anything." They didn't see the invisible knife Arthur had just slipped between my ribs. They saw a widow in shock. They didn't know I was a widow in peril. Before I go on, I want to take a moment. I know we are strangers, you and I. Maybe you are listening to this while you fold the laundry, the same way I did for 40 years. Maybe you are driving to work or sitting in a quiet room with a cup of coffee, trying to find a moment of peace in a loud world. I appreciate you letting me in. I appreciate you listening to a story that isn't easy to tell. We often think that if we follow the rules, if we are good wives, good mothers, good women, that we will be protected. We think that our sacrifice is a form of insurance. I am here to tell you that it is not. I got into the limousine alone. The driver, a kind young man with eyes that looked too old for his face, closed the door gently. The silence of the car was oppressive. I looked out the window as we pulled away from the cemetery, watching the gray stones blur into a smear of slate and green. "You shouldn't be here tomorrow." The words bounced around my skull. What did he mean? The house was mine. It was our house. Robert and I had bought it 30 years ago. We had paid off the mortgage. I had picked out the wallpaper in the hall. I had planted the hydrangeas in the front garden. I had scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees until my knuckles were red. It was my home. But a cold dread was starting to pool in my stomach. Robert had always handled the paperwork. "Don't worry your pretty head about it, Elle," he would say. "I've got the finances handled. You just keep the house running," and I had. I had kept the house running perfectly. I had raised our daughter, Sarah, who was now living in London and couldn't make it back in time for the funeral due to visa issues, or so she said. The distance between us was more than just geography, but that is a pain for another time. I had trusted Robert. That was the currency of our marriage. I gave him my trust, and he gave me a life, or so I thought. When the car pulled up the driveway, the house looked different. It was a large brick colonial, stately and imposing. Usually it looked welcoming to me, a fortress against the world. Today it looked like a mouth waiting to chew me up. The windows looked dark and judgmental. I unlocked the front door, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice. Inside, the house smelled of lilies and floor wax. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that rings in your ears. I walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa, still wearing my coat, still wearing my hat. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for Robert to walk in and tell me Arthur was playing a sick joke. Maybe for the phone to ring, but nothing happened. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked. The rain tapped against the glass. I thought about Arthur's face. He hadn't looked angry. He hadn't looked sad. He had looked efficient. Like he was checking an item off a list. It's best if you start packing tonight. I stood up, my knees cracking. I walked into Robert's study. It was a room I rarely entered. It was his sanctuary, filled with the smell of his pipe tobacco and old paper. His desk was immaculate as always, but something was wrong. Usually there were stacks of files, letters, pending bills. Today, the surface of the mahogany desk was bare, completely bare except for a single layer of dust. I pulled open the top drawer, empty. I pulled open the second drawer, empty. I opened the filing cabinet in the corner. It was unlocked. The folders were there, but they were thin. I pulled one out labeled deed. I opened it. The paper inside was a photocopy. I put on my reading glasses, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scanned the legal jargon, looking for our names, Robert and Eleanor Vance, but I didn't see my name. I saw a transfer date. 5 years ago, transferred to the Arthur Vance Trust. I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a dying leaf. 5 years ago, that was the year Robert had his first heart scare. The year he had sat me down and told me he was getting things in order to make sure I was taken care of. He had brought home papers for me to sign, just standard updates, he had said, smiling that charming smile that had won me over at 21, just to keep the tax man away. I had signed them. I hadn't read them. I had signed them because he was my husband, and I was his wife, and that's what wives did. I sat down in his leather chair, the leather squeaking beneath me. It was too big for me. I felt like a child playing dress-up. I looked around the room, the books on the shelves, the awards on the wall, the photos of us on vacations where he walked 3 steps ahead of me, and I hurried to keep up. "You shouldn't be here tomorrow," I whispered to the empty room. It wasn't a warning, it was an eviction notice. I realized then that I wasn't waiting for grief to hit me. I was waiting for the realization of just how blind I had been. The man I had mourned an hour ago hadn't just died. He had been erasing me for years, and Arthur was just the eraser. The sun began to set, casting long, terrifying shadows across the floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, in a house that wasn't mine, listening to the rain, and realizing that the silence I had cultivated for 50 years was about to scream. I sat in that leather chair until the room went completely black. The only light came from the street lamp outside, slicing through the heavy velvet drapes and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, dust I would have usually wiped away without a second thought. Now the dust felt like the only thing in the room that was honest. It was just dirt. It wasn't hiding anything. My hunger had vanished, replaced by a gnawing, acidic thirst, but I couldn't bring myself to go to the kitchen. The kitchen was my domain. It was where I had kneaded dough, chopped vegetables, and stirred sauces for thousands of dinners. If I went in there now, knowing this house wasn't mine, I felt I might collapse on the linoleum. Instead, I turned on the small brass reading lamp on the desk. The pool of yellow light fell on the empty surface where the deed had been. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back. I needed to understand how I had arrived here. You don't lose 50 years of security in a single afternoon. You lose it in inches, in moments of silence, in small concessions that seem like love but are actually surrenders. I thought about the day I married Robert. I was 21, he was 25, and already acted like he owned the world. My mother had told me as she zipped up my lace dress, "Eleanor, a man like Robert needs a soft place to land. Be his peace. Don't be his problem." I took that advice like it was scripture. I built my life around being his peace. I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. When he spoke over me at dinner parties, I smiled and poured more wine. When he made decisions about where we vacationed, what car we drove, or where Sarah went to school, I nodded and praised his judgment. I thought this was partnership. I thought I was the neck turning the head. I didn't realize I was just the accessory he wore on his arm. My mind went back to that day 5 years ago, the day of the signature. It was a Tuesday. I remembered because I had been making a pot roast. Robert had been home for a week after a minor heart attack, a warning shot, the doctor had called it. He was sitting in the sunroom, a blanket over his legs, looking paler and more fragile than I had ever seen him. Mortality had brushed against him and it terrified him. Arthur was there too. He was standing by the window, looking out at the garden, his hands clasped behind his back. Robert had called out, his voice raspy. Come sit for a minute. I had wiped my hands on my apron, a reflex, always cleaning myself up for him, and sat on the edge of the wicker chair. Arthur and I have been going over the estate, Robert said, reaching out to take my hand. His skin felt papery and cool. This scare, it made me realize I haven't been as diligent as I should be. If something happens to me, I don't want you drowning in probate courts and tax hearings. You know how you get with numbers, it overwhelms you. He wasn't wrong, or so I believed. I had never balanced a checkbook in my life. Robert gave me cash for groceries and household expenses. If I needed a new dress, I charged it to his account. I didn't know what our mortgage was. I didn't know what his investments were. I lived in a bubble of ignorance that he had constructed and I had happily inhabited. We've set up a trust, Arthur said, turning from the window. He didn't look at me, he looked at Robert. It protects the assets, keeps everything streamlined. Exactly, Robert squeezed my hand. It secures the house, the savings, everything. It just means that if I die, the control passes to the trust and the trust takes care of you. You won't have to lift a finger. You just keep living your life, Eleanor. Arthur will handle the boring legal work. He pushed a stack of papers across the glass table. I just need your signature here, here, and here to waive your independent claim so we can consolidate it all into the safety of the trust. I looked at the papers. The text was dense, single-spaced, and full of words like revocable, beneficiary, and custodian. Should I read it? I asked, half joking. Robert chuckled, a soft, wheezing sound. You could, but we'd be here until Christmas. It's standard language, It's for your protection. Do you trust me? That was the weapon, that question. Do you trust me? If I said no, I was a bad wife. If I said yes, I signed the papers. I looked at Arthur. He was watching me with that unreadable, flat expression. It's the smart play, Eleanor, he said, so I signed. I signed my name in blue ink 3 times. With every loop of the E and every cross of the T, I was signing away my autonomy. I was signing away my future because I didn't want to spoil the afternoon. I didn't want to be difficult. I wanted to be the soft place to land. I opened my eyes in the dark study. The memory burned. I had thanked him. I had actually thanked him for taking care of it. I stood up, shaking off the memory, and walked over to the filing cabinet again. I needed to see the scope of it. I found the file for the bank accounts. I opened it. It was recent. A monthly statement from just 3 weeks ago. Joint checking account, balance $4,200. Savings account, balance $0, 0. I flipped the page. There was a transfer log. On the first of every month, Robert's pension, his investment dividends, and his Social Security came into the account. And on the second of every month, almost all of it was swept out, transferred to AV Holdings LLC. Arthur Vance Holdings. Robert hadn't just moved the house. He had been siphoning our liquid cash to his brother for years. He had left just enough in the joint account to cover the electric bill, the groceries, and the gardener. He had put me on an allowance without me even knowing it. Why? The question screamed in my head. Why? Was it cruelty? Was it a lack of faith? Did he think I was going to run away with a pool boy at 70? Or was it something deeper? Was it that he simply didn't see me as a person capable of ownership? To him, I was just another asset to be managed, like the car or the summer cottage. And assets don't own other assets. I felt a wave of nausea. I walked out of the study and climbed the stairs to the second floor. The house felt massive, echoing with the ghosts of the parties we'd thrown and the holidays we'd celebrated. I went into our bedroom, no, his bedroom. I saw his pajamas folded under the pillow. I saw the book he had been reading on the nightstand. I went to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. It was a small carry-on bag. I stared at it. Arthur had said, "Start packing. What do you pack?" Do I pack the clothes he bought me? Do I pack the jewelry he gave me for anniversaries? Technically, if the money used to buy them belonged to the trust, did the items belong to the trust too? Was I stealing if I took my own wedding ring? I walked over to the vanity. I picked up a silver hairbrush. It was heavy antique. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old, not distinguished, not elegant, just old and used. I realized then that my grief for Robert was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't mourning a husband anymore. I was mourning the woman I could have been if I hadn't spent 50 years making myself small. I didn't pack the clothes, I didn't pack the shoes. I went to the bottom drawer of my dresser underneath a stack of winter sweaters. I pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were the things that were actually mine, a locket from my grandmother. A savings bond my father had given me when I graduated high school, probably expired now or worth pennies. A few letters from Sarah before she stopped writing as often. And a diary I had kept when I was 20 before I became Mrs. Robert Vance. I held the diary. I hadn't opened it in decades. I didn't open it now. I just put it in the suitcase. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. I didn't sleep. I watched the digital clock flip the numbers. 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. At 6 a.m., the rain stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and expectant. At 7 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. A black sedan had pulled up. Arthur got out. He was wearing a beige trench coat and carrying a briefcase. He looked fresh, rested, and ready for business. He wasn't coming to mourn. He wasn't coming to check on his sister-in-law. He was coming to liquidate. I zipped up the small suitcase. It was pitifully light. I put on my coat. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't care what I looked like anymore. I walked down the stairs, my hands sliding along the banister I had polished for half a century. I reached the bottom just as the key turned in the lock. The door swung open and Arthur stepped in. He stopped when he saw me standing there in the hallway. He looked surprised, perhaps that I was already awake, or perhaps that I was still there at all. "Eleanor," he said, nodding once. "No good morning, no how are you?" "Arthur," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You're up early, good. The lawyers will be here at 9, but I wanted to do a walkthrough first. Assess the inventory." Inventory. He looked past me, his eyes scanning the living room, tallying the paintings, the rugs, the furniture. He was already calculating the auction prices. "I see you've packed," he said, glancing at the small bag at my feet. "Is that all?" "It's all that's mine," I said. He gave a tight, patronizing smile. "Now, Eleanor, let's not be dramatic. We aren't going to throw you out on the street without a coat. The trust has made provisions, small ones. Temporary housing arrangements have been made at the Whispering Pines facility. Whispering Pines. The state-run nursing home 3 towns over, the place people went to die when they had no money and no family. "I'm not going to Whispering Pines," I said. Arthur's smile vanished. He looked at me with the annoyance of a man dealing with a stubborn child. "Eleanor, look at the reality. You have no assets, you have no income. The house is legally mine, well, the trust's. Sarah is in London and barely answers her phone. Robert did what he thought was best. He knew you couldn't handle the estate. He wanted you somewhere. Supervised, supervised. That was the word that snapped the final thread. He didn't want me supervised, Arthur," I said, taking a step toward him. "He wanted me silenced." Arthur checked his watch. "We can discuss this when the lawyers get here. Why don't you go make some coffee? We have a long morning ahead." He turned his back on me and walked into the living room, picking up a crystal vase to check the hallmark on the bottom. I stood there, looking at his back. I looked at the front door. I looked at my suitcase. I had spent my life building this home, and in one signature I had become a guest who had overstayed her welcome. But as I watched Arthur appraise my vase, I realized something. I wasn't just a guest. I was the one who knew where the skeletons were buried. Robert had been careful, yes, but no man lives with a woman for 50 years without leaving a trail, and Robert was arrogant. He thought I was blind because I had kept my eyes lowered. He was wrong. I didn't move toward the kitchen to make coffee. That simple act of defiance felt monumental, like the first crack in a dam. Arthur, realizing I hadn't obeyed, turned around, the crystal vase still in his hand. "The coffee, Eleanor?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "I don't work here anymore, Arthur," I said. He stared at me, blinking slowly. The unexpected resistance confused him. He set the vase down with a clatter. "You're upset. It's understandable, but let's not make this difficult. Robert wanted this transition to be smooth." "Smooth for whom?" I asked. "For everyone," he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Now, if you're not going to be helpful, at least be out of the way. Go sit in the sunroom." I didn't go to the sunroom. Instead, I picked up my suitcase. "I'm leaving, Arthur." He let out a short, scoffing laugh. "Leaving to go where?" "You have no car. The Buick belongs to the trust. You have no money. You're 71 years old, Eleanor. Be realistic. Sit down and wait for the lawyers so we can sign the transfer papers for your placement at the home." "I'm not signing anything," I said. Arthur sighed, the patience draining from his face. He walked over to me, towering over my small frame. "You don't have a choice. Robert planned this perfectly. You are a dependent. Without this trust, you are destitute. Now stop the theatrics." He reached out to take my suitcase, intending to guide me, force me into the other room. "Don't touch me," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, guttural command that I didn't recognize as my own voice. Arthur stopped, his hand hovering in the air. He looked at my eyes. I don't know what he saw there, but for the first time in 50 years, he looked unsettled. "I called a taxi," I lied. "I hadn't, but I would. I am going to the motel in town." "With what money?" he sneered. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the one thing Robert hadn't touched. The one thing he couldn't put in a trust because he never knew it existed. It was a small velvet pouch. Inside was a diamond brooch. It wasn't a gift from Robert, it was from my mother. She had given it to me on my wedding day, whispering, "For a rainy day, Ellie, just in case." I had never worn it. I had kept it hidden in the lining of my sewing box for 50 years. Robert had forgotten about it, or perhaps he deemed it too trivial to catalog. I held it up. "I have resources, Arthur." His eyes narrowed on the diamonds. "That's family property. That should be inventoried." "It's my family property," I snapped. "And you're not getting it." I walked past him. I actually walked past him. He was so stunned by the shift in dynamic that he didn't grab me. He just watched me open the heavy front door. "If you walk out that door, Eleanor," he called out, his voice turning cold and threatening, "the offer for Whispering Pines is off the table. You'll be on your own. Robert won't be there to save you." I stopped on the threshold. I looked back at the hallway. I looked at the dark wood, the polished floors, the grand staircase. I looked at the cage I had kept so clean. "Robert never saved me, Arthur," I said quietly. "He just kept me." I slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I walked down the long driveway. It was still cold and the damp air bit through my coat. My suitcase bumped against my leg. I didn't look back. I knew if I looked back, the fear would overtake me. I knew the reality of my situation, homeless, widow, 71, would crush me if I let it, so I focused on my feet. Left. Right, left, right. I walked a mile to the nearest gas station. My hips ached and my breath came in short puffs. I used the payphone, one of the few left, and called a taxi. When I got to the motel, a cheap roadside place with peeling paint, the clerk looked at me with suspicion. A woman in funeral clothes with a single suitcase checking in at 8 a.m. "One night," I said, placing the brooch on the counter. "I don't have cash yet, but this is real. I'll go to the pawn shop when it opens and pay you in full." The clerk, a young girl with purple hair, looked at the brooch, then at me. Her expression softened. "Keep your jewelry, ma'am. You can pay me later, room 104. I went to the room. It smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. I sat on the bed. It was lumpy. It was the furthest thing from the silk sheets I had slept on the night before. And I started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. I laughed until tears ran down my face. I laughed because I was terrified. I laughed because I was free, but the laughter faded into silence. I lay back on the bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. What was I going to do? I closed my eyes and let the panic recede. I needed to think. Robert had been meticulous. He had planned this for 5 years. He had hidden the money. He had transferred the titles. But Robert had a flaw, his arrogance. He assumed I was stupid. He assumed that because I didn't understand the complex legal structures, I didn't understand him. I remembered something. About 10 years ago, Robert had been obsessed with a renovation project on our Summer Lake house. He had hired a contractor, a man named Miller. There had been arguments, shouting matches in the study. I had brought them tea and they had gone silent as soon as I entered. One day, I found a receipt in the laundry. It was for a storage unit, not in our town, but in the town near the lake house. It was in my name. I had asked Robert about it. "Oh, that," he had waved it off. "Just some overflow materials for the renovation. I put it in your name because, well, tax reasons. Don't worry about it." I hadn't worried about it. I had forgotten about it, but now, lying in this motel room, I remembered. "I put it in your name. If it was in my name, Arthur couldn't touch it. The trust couldn't touch it." But why would Robert put building materials in a storage unit for 10 years? And why put it in my name unless he wanted to hide it from his own business ledgers? I sat up. I checked my purse. I had my ID. I had about $40 in cash that I had squirreled away in my coat pocket. I needed to get to the lake house town. It was 2 hours away. I couldn't afford a taxi that far. I walked to the bus station. I sat on a plastic bench next to a teenager listening to loud music. I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost haunting the world of the living. The bus ride was long and jarring. I watched the landscape change from suburbs to woods. I thought about Sarah. I should call her, but what would I say? "Your father died and he left me nothing, and your uncle is kicking me out." I couldn't bear the shame, not yet. I had to solve this first. I had to know what was in that storage unit. When I arrived in the town, I found the facility. It was a rundown place with rows of orange metal doors. I went to the office. I need to access my unit, I told the man behind the desk. Eleanor Vance, he typed on a greasy keyboard. Vance, Vance, yep, unit 4 billion, payment is current, auto pay from our Vance business account. Robert had been paying for it all this time. I lost my key, I said. Can you cut the lock? Cost you $20, he grunted. I handed him half of my remaining cash. He walked me to the unit. He used a pair of bolt cutters. Snap, the lock fell. He slid the door up. It rattled and groaned, protesting the years of disuse. All yours, he said, walking away. I stood before the open darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I expected to see lumber, bags of cement. Old furniture. I clicked on the flashlight app on my phone, something Sarah had taught me to use years ago. The beam cut through the dust. The unit was small, and it was almost empty. There were no building materials. In the center of the concrete floor sat a single gray metal filing cabinet, and next to it a medium-sized safe. I stepped inside. The air smelled of dry dust and secrets. I tried the filing cabinet, unlocked. I pulled open the top drawer. It wasn't filled with renovation plans. It was filled with bank books, not from our bank, from banks in the Cayman Islands, from banks in Switzerland. I pulled one out. The name on the account wasn't Robert Vance. It was Eleanor Vance. I gasped, dropping the book. I opened another, Eleanor Vance. He had opened offshore accounts in my name. Why? I opened the bottom drawer. There were letters from Arthur to Robert. I picked one up. It was dated 12 years ago. Rob, the audit is coming. If they find the skimming from the construction contracts, we're done. You need to hide the assets, put them somewhere they won't look. Use Eleanor. If the feds come down, she takes the fall. She's the owner of record. You can plead ignorance. She signs whatever you put in front of her anyway. I read it again. She takes the fall. I fell to my knees on the dirty concrete. The trust wasn't just to steal the house. The trust was the exit strategy, but this was the insurance policy. Robert hadn't just disinherited me, he had framed me. He had been embezzling money for decades, hiding it in accounts under my name so that if the law ever caught up with him, I would be the one going to prison. I was his human shield, and the safe, I looked at the safe. It had a digital keypad. I didn't know the code, but I knew Robert. He was a creature of habit. I typed in our wedding date, 61,474. Beep, click, the door swung open. Inside, there were stacks of cash, thick bundles of $100 bills, and a passport, my passport, but the photo was recent. I had never taken this photo. He must have taken it while I was sleeping or cropped it from a family picture. And a ticket, a one-way plane ticket to Brazil, dated for next week. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Arthur hadn't just kicked me out of the house to be cruel. He kicked me out because he needed me to disappear. He needed me to look like a fugitive. If I was gone, if I was destitute and running, I would look guilty. Arthur wasn't just executing a will, he was executing a setup. I sat there in the dust, surrounded by millions of dollars of dirty money and the proof of my husband's ultimate betrayal. I wasn't a widow, I was a patsy. And for the first time in my life, the tears didn't come. Something else did. Rage, pure, cold, focused rage. I stood up. I brushed the dust off my funeral dress. I looked at the cash. I looked at the letters. Arthur thought I was a helpless old woman. Robert thought I was a soft place to land. They were about to find out that I was the storm. Rage is a funny thing. We are taught to fear it, to suppress it, especially women. We are told that anger makes us ugly, irrational, hysterical. But standing in that dusty storage unit, surrounded by the physical evidence of my husband's betrayal, I realized that rage isn't a fire that burns you down. It's an engine. If you control it, it drives you. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the filing cabinet against the wall. I moved with a precision I hadn't felt in years. I emptied my suitcase of the few clothes I had packed. I folded the diary, the record of the girl I used to be, and placed it at the very bottom. Then I began to stack the bundles of cash on top of it. Thump, 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 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. I stopped counting at $200,000. I left the rest in the safe. I couldn't carry it all, and taking it all would look like theft. Taking some, well, that was just spousal support. I took every single letter. I took every bank book. I took the fake passport. I packed my life into that carry-on bag until the zippers strained. It was heavy, a dead weight in my hand, but it felt like armor. I left the storage unit, locking it with the padlock I found on the floor. I walked back out into the sunlight. The world looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but I was living in a different reality. I wasn't Eleanor the widow anymore. I was Eleanor the evidence. I needed a lawyer, but I couldn't go to the family firm. They were Arthur's creatures now. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. If I walked into a precinct with a bag full of cash and offshore accounts in my name, I'd be in handcuffs before I could finish a sentence. Robert had built a perfect cage. I needed someone who hated Robert as much as I currently did. I went back to the payphone. I closed my eyes, searching the archives of my memory for the dinner table conversations I was never supposed to understand. Thorn is a problem, Arthur. He's digging too deep. We need to crush him. Elias Thorn. He had been a forensic accountant and attorney who had tried to audit Robert's construction firm 15 years ago. Robert had destroyed him, ruined his reputation, planted stories in the press about incompetence, buried him in lawsuits until he lost his license for a year. Robert had laughed about it over brandy. The man is a gnat, Eleanor. And I just swatted him. I found his listing in the yellow pages of the phone book chained to the booth. He wasn't in a high-rise downtown. He was in a strip mall on the edge of the city, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a payday loan shop. I used some of the cash to pay a taxi driver to take me there. He looked at the crisp $100 bill with suspicion, holding it up to the light. "It's real," I said, my voice flat. "Just drive." Thorne's office was small, smelling of stale coffee and old carpet. Elias Thorne sat behind a desk that was messy in a way Robert's never was, piles of paper, law books stacked on the floor. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinning, his face lined with the kind of fatigue that comes from fighting losing battles. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't recognize me at first. I was just an old woman with a suitcase. "We're closed for lunch," he grunted, not looking away from his computer screen. "Hello, Mr. Thorne," I said. He stopped typing. He looked up, squinting. Then recognition dawned. His eyes widened and his jaw tightened. "Mrs. Vance," he said. The name tasted like poison in his mouth. "If you're here to deliver another cease and desist from your husband, you can leave it on the floor and get out." "My husband is dead," I said. Thorne leaned back in his chair. "I heard I'd say I'm sorry, but I don't lie to clients." "I'm not here for sympathy," I said. I hauled the suitcase onto his desk. It landed with a heavy, solid thud. "I'm here to hire you." He laughed, a dry, humorless bark. "Hire me, Mrs. Vance. Your husband made sure I handled divorces and DUIs. I don't touch corporate estates. I'm not qualified for the Shark Tank you live in." "I don't need you to handle the estate," I said. "I need you to help me destroy it." I unzipped the bag. I didn't say a word. I just reached in and pulled out a stack of cash, then another, then the letters from Arthur, then the bank books from the Caymans. Thorne went silent. He stared at the money. He picked up one of the bank books, flipping through it. His casual demeanor evaporated instantly. He put on a pair of glasses and leaned in, reading the letters. "Jesus," he whispered. "He was funneling the skimming through you." "Yes," I said, "and Arthur is closing the loop. He kicked me out of the house this morning. He wants me destitute so I look like a flight risk. They have a ticket to Brazil in my name." Thorne looked up at me. "If these accounts are flagged, you're looking at 20 years, Eleanor, fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. They set you up to be the fall guy for a $50 million scheme." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here. You know how Robert thought. You know where the bodies are buried because you tried to dig them up 15 years ago. I have the shovel now." Thorne stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. He stayed silent for a long time. When he turned back, the fatigue was gone from his face. In its place was a sharp, dangerous hunger. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "We can go to the feds, cut a deal. You turn state's evidence, hand over the cash, maybe get probation." "No," I said. "I didn't want probation. I didn't want to be the pitiful widow who got caught in her husband's web. I wanted what was mine. I wanted the dignity they had stolen from me." "Arthur thinks I'm stupid," I said. "He thinks I'm a scared old woman who is going to run away or collapse at Whispering Pines. He thinks silence is my nature." I looked at Thorne. "I want to go back to the house?" Thorne asked, frowning. "That's dangerous." "It's only dangerous if they know," I said. "Arthur expects me to be hysterical. He expects me to beg. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to beg. I'm going to sign his papers. I'm going to play the role of the grieving, confused widow one last time." "Why?" "Because," I said, tapping the letters on the desk, "Arthur is greedy. The trust protects the assets, but it doesn't protect him if he's personally implicated in the fraud. These letters prove he knew, but I need more. I need him to admit that the accounts are mine and that he controls them. I need him to put his hand in the cookie jar while I'm holding the lid." Thorne smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile. "You want to wire yourself. I want to catch him," I said. "Can you set it up?" "I can do better," Thorne said. "I can draft a confession of judgment. It's a document where you admit to the debt, to the embezzlement in exchange for a settlement. If you present it to him as a way to protect the family name, he might sign it as the creditor to validate the debt." If he signs it, he acknowledges the scheme exists. He won't sign a confession, I said. He will if he thinks you are the one confessing, Thorne said. We word it so you are taking the blame, but he has to countersign as the trustee accepting the assets. Once he signs as the beneficiary of illegal funds, he's an accomplice. I understood. It was a trap wrapped in a surrender. Prepare it, I said. I'm going home. I left the suitcase with Thorne, the money, the documents. I only kept the brooch. I trusted this man not because he was good, but because he wanted Arthur's head on a platter more than he wanted the money. Hate is a powerful collateral. I took a taxi back to the house. It was late afternoon now. The sky was bruising purple and black. When the taxi pulled up, the black sedan was still there. The lawyers were there. I walked to the front door. My hands were empty. My coat was damp. I looked every inch the defeated woman they hoped I was. I opened the door. Arthur was in the living room with two men in suits. They were drinking Robert's scotch. They looked up when I entered. Arthur set his glass down. He looked annoyed but triumphant. You came back, he said. I assume you realized you have nowhere else to go. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump. I forced a tremor into my hands. I'm sorry, Arthur, I whispered. I was scared. I didn't mean what I said. Arthur exchanged a look with the lawyers, a look that said, I told you so. He walked over to me, his demeanor softening into that fake, oily pity. It's all right, Eleanor. Grief makes us do irrational things. We were just worried about you. I don't have any money, I said, my voice cracking. I couldn't even pay for a hotel. Well, that's why we're here, Arthur said, placing a hand on my shoulder. It took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. To make sure you're taken care of. The car for Whispering Pines can be here in an hour. We just need to handle the paperwork. I'll sign, I said. I'll sign whatever you want. I don't want to be alone. Good, Arthur said. Good girl, good girl. The rage inside me flared white-hot, but on the outside I just sniffled and wiped my eyes. But Arthur, I asked, looking up at him with wide, watery eyes. There's one thing, Robert, he told me about the other accounts, the ones overseas. The room went deathly silent. The lawyers froze. Arthur's hand tightened on my shoulder. He told me I was in trouble, I lied, improvising on Thorne's plan. He said I had to sign something to give them to the trust, or the police would come for me. I don't want to go to jail, Arthur. Please, can we move those two? So I'm safe, Arthur stared at me. He was calculating. He thought I was terrified of prison. He thought I was begging him to take the illegal money off my hands. He didn't see the trap. He only saw the millions of dollars he hadn't yet been able to legally touch because they were in my name. You want to transfer the overseas assets to the trust? He asked slowly. Please, I begged, take them, take it all. I just want to be safe, Arthur smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who just found the gate to the sheep pen open. Get the papers, he said to the lawyers. Draft an amendment. We're cleaning house. I sat down on the sofa, clutching my purse. I watched them scramble. I watched them draft the document that would seal their fate. I wasn't fighting. I was feeding them, and they were swallowing it whole. The sound of a pen scratching against paper is usually innocuous. It's a dry, whispery sound, like a dead leaf skittering across pavement. But in that living room, under the heavy crystal chandelier that I had dusted for 40 years, the sound was thunderous. The lawyers had drafted the addendum quickly. It was a single page, dense with legal verbiage, attaching the unlisted international assets, the Cayman accounts, the Swiss holdings to the Arthur Vance Trust. By signing it, I was formally acknowledging that these accounts existed and relinquishing my claim to them. But by countersigning it, Arthur was formally accepting them. He was accepting the money, the liability, and the history of how that money got there. He was putting his signature on the receipt of stolen goods. Sign here, one of the lawyers said, pointing a manicured finger at the line. My hand shook. This time I didn't have to fake it. I was terrified. Not of them, but of the enormity of what I was doing. I was burning down the only life I had ever known. If this went wrong, if Arthur read the fine print too closely, or if he sensed the trap, I wouldn't just be homeless. I would be destroyed. I pressed the pen to the paper. Eleanor Vance. I looked up at Arthur. He was watching me with a look of supreme satisfaction. He wasn't looking at the law, he was looking at the ledger. He was counting the millions he thought he had just secured. Your turn, Mr. Vance, the lawyer said, sliding the paper across the mahogany coffee table. Arthur sat down. He didn't hesitate. He didn't consult a moral compass. He clicked his expensive gold pen, a gift Robert had given him for his 50th birthday, and signed his name with a flourish. Arthur Vance, trustee. It was done. He capped the pen and stood up, sliding the document into his leather folio. There, he said, exhaling as if he had just finished a hard day's labor. That cleans everything up. You did the right thing, Eleanor. Robert would be proud. The irony was so sharp it almost cut my tongue, but I swallowed it. I just want it to be over, I whispered. It is, Arthur said. The car for Whispering Pines is outside. The driver will help you with your luggage. He looked at my single, small carry-on bag. He didn't know it was packed with $200,000 in cash and the evidence that would send him to federal prison. He thought it contained old sweaters and a toothbrush. Goodbye, Arthur, I said. He didn't look at me. He was already pouring another scotch for the lawyers. Take care of yourself, Eleanor. I walked out the front door. The air outside was crisp and cold, smelling of wet earth and pine. The black town car was waiting, the engine idling, puffing white clouds of exhaust into the evening air. The driver, a stranger, opened the back door for me. I slid onto the leather seat. The door closed with a heavy thud, sealing me in. As we pulled away, I turned to look at the house. The lights were on in the living room. I could see the silhouettes of the men inside, laughing, toasting their victory. It was a beautiful house, a fortress, a tomb. I watched it until we turned the corner and the trees swallowed it whole. I never saw it again. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. The paperwork says Whispering Pines. I leaned forward. The glass partition was down. I reached into my purse and pulled out a stack of bills, $500. I've changed my mind, I said, my voice steady and clear. Take me to the train station. The one in the city. The driver looked at the money in the rearview mirror, then at my eyes. He didn't ask questions. He was paid to drive. Yes, ma'am, I didn't go to Thorne's office. I went to a hotel near the station, a nice one this time. I ordered room service. I took a long, hot bath. I washed the smell of the funeral and the lies off my skin. The next morning, I mailed a large, padded envelope to Elias Thorne. Inside were the copies of the bank books, the letters from the safe, and the original copy of the document Arthur had signed, which I had swiped from the coffee table in the confusion of leaving. A final sleight of hand I hadn't planned, but seized in the moment. I included a note he signed, pull the trigger. Then I got on a train, not to Brazil, not to London to burden Sarah. I went west. I went to a small town in Oregon where the mountains meet the sea, a place Robert had once dismissed as too damp and depressing. I had always wanted to see it. The news didn't break for 3 weeks. I was sitting in a small cafe, drinking tea and reading a local paper when I saw it. It wasn't the headline. Arthur wasn't famous enough for that, but it was in the business section. Prominent developer indicted in fraud scheme. Arthur Vance arrested following FBI raid. Assets frozen. I read the article. It was brutal. Thorne had done his work with surgical precision. The investigation had uncovered the offshore accounts, the embezzlement from the construction contracts, and the fraudulent trust structures. And because Arthur had countersigned for the assets just weeks prior, claiming them as part of his controlled estate, he couldn't claim ignorance. He was the trustee, he was the owner of record. Robert was dead and couldn't be charged. The public narrative became that the two brothers had conspired together, but Arthur was the one left holding the bag. They mentioned the widow briefly. Eleanor Vance, the surviving spouse, is reportedly cooperating with authorities and is not considered a suspect at this time. Cooperating, that was a nice word for it. I folded the newspaper and left it on the table. I walked out to the pier and watched the gray waves crash against the pilings. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy, it wasn't triumph, it was lighter than that, it was peace. I lived in that small town for the rest of my years. I rented a small cottage with a garden that I tended myself. I didn't have millions. The government seized the accounts, the house, the cars. The spousal support I had taken from the safe was enough to keep me comfortable, combined with a small survivor's benefit that Thorne managed to salvage for me, legally this time. Sarah came to visit me once. She was angry at first, confused why I hadn't fought for the house, why I had let the family name be dragged through the mud. Dad built that legacy, she said, sitting in my small kitchen, looking out of place in her designer clothes. Your father built a lie, Sarah, I told her gently, and he built it on my back. I just decided to stand up. She didn't understand, not fully. She was still mourning the idol she thought her father was. I didn't try to take that away from her. She would learn the truth of people in her own time. I never married again. I never even dated. I had spent 50 years being a wife, and I found that I quite enjoyed just being Eleanor. I joined a book club. I learned to paint watercolors terribly but enthusiastically. I walked on the beach every morning, rain or shine. I often thought about that moment at the funeral. You shouldn't be here tomorrow. Arthur was right. I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have been in that house, in that marriage, in that silence for as long as I was. But I forgave myself for that. We do what we have to do to survive until we realize that survival isn't enough. Sometimes, late at night, I would look at the diamond brooch. I never sold it. I kept it in the velvet pouch in my nightstand. It was a reminder that even when you think you have nothing, even when you think you have been stripped bare, you still have something hidden in the lining. You still have your dignity, you still have your voice. And if you are very lucky and very brave, you have the courage to use it. So here we are at the end of my story. I'm speaking to you now, wherever you are. Maybe you're in a marriage that feels like a cage. Maybe you're the good one in your family, the one who keeps the peace, the one who swallows the insults and signs the papers and smiles when you want to scream. Maybe you think that if you just love them enough, if you're just quiet enough, they will protect you. I want to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly in the quiet of your own heart. If the people you are sacrificing everything for were given the choice between your well being and their own comfort, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure they wouldn't ask you to leave tomorrow? Because if you aren't sure, my dear, it might be time to start packing your own bag, not with clothes, but with the truth.